In the harshest heart of winter, where snow blankets every branch and the wind howls through the worn wooden roof, there lives a man who has been breathing but not truly alive for years. His name is Jonathan Hayes, 45 years old, once the king of Wall Street, commanding a financial empire worth billions. A single nod from him could send the market trembling. But all that power, all that glittering wealth meant nothing after the night he lost the two treasures of his life, his wife Charlotte and his little daughter Lily. That pain buried Jonathan, driving him away from the world, locking him inside a lonely cabin deep in the wild woods, where only blizzards and haunting memories kept him company. He accepted his fate, living like a ghost in the forest, invisible to the world, until one morning when a faint, fragile sound, like a dying breath, pierced through the thick snow. The cry of a child. And in that fleeting moment, destiny turned its wheel, pulling Jonathan back into the life he had abandoned for 5 long years. Before burying himself deep in the forest, Jonathan Hayes was the very picture of success, the man countless others admired and secretly dreamed to become. Born to a working-class family in the outskirts of Boston, Jonathan knew life never gave second chances. He studied tirelessly, earning a full scholarship to Princeton University and graduating top of his finance class in just 3 years, faster than anyone else. At 28, Jonathan founded Hayes Capital Group, an investment powerhouse that, within a decade, had offices in 30 major cities worldwide. The media crowned him the man with the golden touch, the genius who turned bankrupt companies into profit giants almost overnight. But if you asked Jonathan what made him proudest, he wouldn't mention billions or record-shaking deals. He would speak of Charlotte, the woman with eyes as blue as a June sky, and Lily, his little girl with silken blonde hair always tied slightly crooked, who loved climbing onto his lap for bedtime stories. Jonathan's true happiness was simple: brewing morning coffee for Charlotte, kissing her cheek before work, and driving Lily to school while singing silly songs. Every evening, no matter how urgent the calls, he'd silence his phone to curl up on the sofa with his girls, watching cartoons and laughing until they fell asleep. For him, the whole world fit inside their Manhattan penthouse, where Charlotte's embrace and Lily's giggles warmed even the harshest winter. Then came that night, a single phone call at 9:37 p.m. that shattered it all. The police informed him Charlotte and Lily had been in a crash on their way home from a friend's birthday party. A drunk driver had crossed the lane and hit them head-on. The drunk survived. Jonathan's entire universe did not. The funeral overflowed with flowers and condolences, but Jonathan's heart was a desert. Hundreds came to mourn, thousands sent letters, but nothing filled the 2 empty beds at home. Each night, he sat alone on the sofa, staring at photos of his girls, questioning why a man who could untangle the world's toughest deals was powerless against fate. 3 months after laying them to rest, Jonathan resigned. He sold the $12 million 0-cents penthouse, liquidated his classic car collection, closed the vacation villa, and vanished from the investment world. No one could stop him. No one could comprehend the suffocating despair that devoured every breath he took. When his partners begged him to take a break, he simply shook his head. "I'm not taking a break. I'm disappearing." And so, Jonathan Hayes, once Wall Street's king, abandoned it all, severed every tie, and chose a decaying cabin deep in the woods, where cell service died, no one called his name, and no one whispered the 2 names he loved most: Charlotte and Lily. For 5 long years, that cabin was the graveyard of his memories. Every dawn, Jonathan woke to the wind howling through cracked windows, fed a few chickens, chopped wood, read dry technical manuals to kill time, and drifted into empty sleep. It was his self-imposed penance, a financial prodigy reduced to anonymous caretaker of the forest, because if he couldn't keep his loved ones safe, then nothing else was worth holding on to. The 5th winter passed in its dead silence. Jonathan had grown used to hearing the wind howl like the mourning of old memories, used to watching snow pile high against the foggy window. Each day froze into the next. Nothing ever changed. Until that morning. Jonathan was scattering corn for his small flock of chickens in the yard. His breath rose like smoke, his calloused hands trembled in the biting cold. Suddenly, hidden within the wind's whistle, he caught another sound, faint, broken, like a lost kitten's cry. He froze, listening harder. Silence. Only the wind again. He shook his head, telling himself he must have imagined it. His mind still liked to torture old wounds. But then it came again. Clearer this time, thin but desperate. Not a kitten, a child's cry. A sound Jonathan thought he would never hear again in this secluded wilderness. He dropped the bucket, heart pounding in his ears. One thought flashed through his mind. I can't ignore this. His boots crunched back toward the cabin. He grabbed a flashlight, a thick wool blanket, and his old army coat, then bolted toward the cry, into the stormy forest waiting ahead. Snow climbed to his knees, dragging every step into the frozen ground. The wind slapped his face raw, but he didn't stop. The fragile sob guided him like a slender thread through the white oblivion, each step deeper, each breath harsher. But he knew, even 1 minute too late, and that child might not have a heartbeat left to cry. At last, through the heavy trees, he saw it, a frail shape curled beneath an old pine, a young woman, her head drooped, shoulders and hair blanketed with snow, arms locked tight around a sodden cloth bundle, and from that bundle a raspy, weakening wail, a last plea for life. Jonathan dropped to his knees beside them, peeling back the thin cover. A baby boy, skin ghost pale, lips blue as frostbite. The mother trembled violently, on the brink of losing consciousness, eyes glazed with exhaustion yet flickering with a fragile hope when they met Jonathan's. She whispered, her voice barely a breath, "Please, save my baby." Jonathan swallowed the lump in his throat. He shrugged off his heavy coat, wrapped both mother and child snugly, and lifted them into his arms. His heartbeat thundered louder than any billion-dollar deal had ever made it. Race. Facing the wind that clawed at him, he growled through clenched teeth. "You'll be okay, I promise." And for the first time in all these years, Jonathan Hayes, the man who once abandoned the entire world, hurled himself back into the storm to save two fragile lives he had never even met. Jonathan nearly collapsed as he forced the heavy cabin door open against the roaring wind. He laid the young woman and the little boy on the only bed beside the fireplace, a bed untouched by anyone but him, for 5 lonely years. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from a deeply human fear, the fear of losing someone again. He built the biggest fire he could, hurling dry logs into the crackling flames, unleashing years of frozen solitude in each fierce throw. Jonathan knelt by the little boy first. The child still breathed, shallow, weak, faint wisps of life drifting into the frigid air. He peeled away the soaking wet cloth, wrapped him in his thickest wool blanket, then rushed to the tiny kitchen to heat milk over the crackling stove. Testing the milk on his wrist, memories sliced into him like a warm blade. Images of feeding Lily, hearing her giggle in Charlotte's arms. Jonathan's chest clenched. He shivered, but refused to cry. Somehow this small stranger in his cabin was waking up the part of him he thought had died forever. He sat down, cradling Leo close to his chest, spoon trembling slightly in his calloused hand. The boy's eyes fluttered open, glazed but seeking him. Jonathan drew a deep breath. The first spoonful touched Leo's lips. The warm liquid slid down the child's throat, and Leo whimpered softly, instinctively sucking at each gentle offering. Every spoonful pulled Jonathan further from the darkness. He was no longer an empty husk. He was a man, a father, and that instinct, buried under grief, roared awake in his veins. Watching Leo swallow, feeling the tiny hand clutch at his shirt, Jonathan's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst free from his ribs. For a fleeting heartbeat, the boy's face blurred into Lily's. Small lips, fragile breaths, soft warmth. He knew Leo was not his child, yet somehow this boy was pulling him back from the edge of lifelessness. The child's cries faded. Exhausted sobs gave way to steady breathing. Jonathan pressed his cheek to Leo's forehead, cold sweat mingling with the warmth he'd fought so hard to revive. He whispered, voice ragged. "You're gonna be okay. I'll protect you, I promise." He gently laid Leo near the fireplace, tucked the blanket securely, then turned back to the young mother. Her hair clung to her cheeks, lips cracked and dry. Jonathan shrugged off his own sweater, draping it over her bony shoulders, pulling the blanket up to her chin. He sat there, eyes locked on them. The fire cast shadows of two fragile forms, a child and a woman he'd never known, yet in Jonathan's eyes they looked heartbreakingly familiar. He saw Charlotte, saw Lily, saw the broken dream he thought could never breathe again. Near dawn, the woman whimpered faintly. Her eyelids trembled open, dulled by exhaustion, but reflecting the warm glow of the flames. She croaked out, half-sobbed, "My baby. Leo?" Jonathan smiled for the first time in years. He's okay, right there by the fire. He's sleeping safe now. And you're safe too. Tears slid down her cheeks. She whispered, "I'm Hannah Rivers." Jonathan nodded, his voice deep but steady. "I'm Jonathan Hayes. Here, you and Leo are safe, I promise. And this time, I won't break that promise." A promise slipped out as naturally as breath, but this time, Jonathan knew he would never break it. Because for the first time in 5 long years, in this lonely cabin, he felt his heart beating again, strong and filled with hope. 3 days had passed since Jonathan found Hannah and Leo in that sea of white snow. Inside the tiny cabin, a fragile but unmistakable new rhythm of life had begun. Small, delicate, yet so warmly alive. By day, Jonathan chopped wood, fetched water, and tended the chickens. Leo, now awake, stronger, waddled after him like a duckling trailing its mother. Each time Jonathan added logs to the stove, the boy would chirp, "Uncle Joe, me help." The cabin, once echoing only the moan of the wind, now filled with the giggles of a child. Hannah sat near the fireplace, wrapped in an old blanket, eyes never straying far from her son. She still coughed sometimes, cold deep in her chest, but in her eyes, the brightest thing wasn't fear. It was a fragile hope rekindled by the warmth around her. One afternoon while Leo napped, Hannah called Jonathan over. Her voice was raspy, each word like a blade scraping her battered pride. "I need to tell you everything. I don't want you thinking I'm some reckless mother who ran into a snowstorm." Jonathan sat opposite her, resting his hands on his knees, eyes steady and patient. Hannah drew a long breath. She spoke of growing up in a poor town, losing her mother to cancer, watching her father drown himself in whiskey and debts, before abandoning her to scrape by working double shifts at a dingy cafe. Then came Derek Rivers, a well-dressed man nearly 10 years her senior, who brought her flowers and whispered sweet futures into her hungry ears. To a young girl desperate for a way out, Derek looked like salvation. She left friends, quit her job, moved in with him. But soon Derek's real face showed. Jealous, controlling, cutting her off from everyone, demanding she quit work, counting every dollar she spent. Every argument ended with a slap, a kick, then roses and sugar-coated apologies. 2 years later, Hannah was pregnant, but Leo wasn't Derek's son. He was the single consequence of one desperate night when Hannah, fleeing Derek's fury, found fleeting comfort in the arms of an old coworker. One night. One time. Derek found out when Leo was born. The DNA test became her iron collar for 3 endless years. He didn't divorce her, didn't leave. Instead, raising another man's child was his perfect punishment for her betrayal. Each drunken rage, each mounting debt, Hannah was his punching bag for every frustration. "I wanted to run so many times," Hannah's voice cracked like thin ice under heat. "But he threatened to prove I was an unfit mother, to take Leo away, to ruin us both. I had nowhere to go." Tears rolled, hot streaks in the cold room. Jonathan reached out, clasping her thin hand in his strong one, squeezing gently. But the worst night came just a week before Jonathan found them. Derek staggered home past midnight, breath soaked in whiskey, eyes bloodshot. Leo burned with fever, wailing. Hannah knelt with a damp cloth when Derek roared, "Shut that brat up, I can't stand it." He ripped the bowl from her hands, hurled it against the wall, and slammed her head into the counter. When she came to, Derek was dragging Leo through the front door into the howling snowstorm, flinging an old bag of clothes onto the porch. "Freeze to death for all I care." Hannah clutched Leo and ran, feet bleeding, lips cracked blue, ears deaf to the storm, hearing only her baby's weakening cries and the same whispered prayer, "God, please, let us live." Her voice cracked now, tears dripping silently onto the back of Jonathan's steady hand, which clasped hers firmly. Jonathan murmured, his tone granite sodded despite the storm raging outside. "No one will ever touch you again. No one will dare. I swear it." Hannah stared at him, surprise mingling with a flicker of fragile trust. Her cracked lips quivered. "Aren't you afraid? Derek won't let this go. He'll come here." Jonathan's smile was cold, the same cold smile Wall Street had feared for decades. The smile of a man who could ruin an enemy without ever raising a fist, just with a single phone call. "If he dares come here," Jonathan said evenly, eyes blazing like the fire behind him, "I'll show him what losing everything truly looks like." In that moment, Hannah understood. This cabin was more than shelter from a snowstorm. It had become a fortress. And Jonathan, the lonely stranger she once thought him to be, was now the strongest shield she had ever known. Hannah looked up at Jonathan, her eyes red and swollen. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why do you live alone in such a remote place? A man like you should be somewhere out in the world, not in a cabin hidden in the woods." This time, Jonathan was silent for a long moment. He looked out the window. Snow was falling gently, quietly blanketing the trees. "Because I was a coward once too." His answer surprised Hannah. "I had a family," Jonathan began, his voice low. "Charlotte, my wife, and Lily, our little girl. They were my entire world." Jonathan stood up and walked over to the fireplace, where two small photo frames rested. He picked one up and handed it to Hannah. In the photo was a beautiful woman with brown hair and bright green eyes, smiling radiantly as she held a small girl who shared the same eyes. The little girl's toothy grin made Hannah's heart ache. "They passed away?" Hannah whispered. Jonathan nodded. "Car accident, a drunk driver." Hannah brought a hand to her chest, as if the pain was hers too. "I used to be the CEO of Hayes Global, a multi-billion-dollar company," Jonathan continued. "Power, money, but none of it could save the people I loved most. After the funeral, I gave it all up. The company, the wealth, everything. I came here thinking that if I cut myself off from the world, the pain would stop. And it did, but not because it went away. It stopped because everything else inside me died too." Anna sat there, stunned, until you and Leo showed up. She looked at him, the man who had once been the most powerful and wealthy person she had ever met, now living alone in a cabin in the woods, and telling her that she and her son had made him feel alive again. Jonathan looked deeply into her eyes. "Hannah, yes, I just want you to know, if you need to stay here for however long, it's okay. This isn't a temporary shelter. This is a home. And you, Leo, you're welcome here." Hannah's heart tightened. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not just through words, but through a sincere presence. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for saving Leo. Thank you for making me feel like I still deserve to live." In that moment, as the wind rustled through the cabin roof and the firelight danced across the wooden walls, Jonathan and Hannah looked at each other, and both realized they were stepping into something greater than pity or gratitude, a chance to begin again. But before they could fully embrace that peace, 200 kilometers away, Derek, the man who had abandoned Hannah and Leo in the snowstorm, had just received word that they were still alive. He had never known how to accept defeat, Piled up debts and his gambling addiction turned Derek into a cornered beast. He hired a cheap private investigator. Tracing old pharmacy receipts and odd wire transfers Hannah had secretly made from the last small town she stopped at before crossing the woods. One morning, while Jonathan was carving a toy for Leo, his satellite phone rang, a device he used only once a month to check the outside world. On the other end was Miles Anderson, his best friend, and the lawyer who once helped him build Hayes Capital Group. "Joe, I've got news. Derek Rivers hired someone to find Hannah. He knows she's alive and he won't back down." Jonathan clenched the carving knife, its tip digging deep into the half-finished block of wood. He glanced at Leo sleeping soundly on the bed, then at Hannah, smiling softly while folding tiny warm clothes. "Miles, I need you to do two things." Jonathan's voice was calm, as if reading a financial statement, but his eyes burned like forged steel. 1. Gather every scrap of proof Derek ever hit or threatened Hannah. 2. Secure Leo's legal rights. If he so much as breathes near them, he'll lose his freedom before he ever reaches this cabin. Miles chuckled. "Welcome back, Jonathan Hayes. I always said Wall Street lost you too soon." Hanging up, Jonathan turned back to Hannah. He told her everything, masking the rage boiling under his ribs. Hannah trembled, biting her lip until it bled. "You should let me and Leo leave. I dragged you into this mess." Jonathan placed his hand on her shoulder, voice low but unwavering. "You didn't drag me into anything. I chose this. Derek Rivers will never touch you again. I promise." But Jonathan knew Derek was more than just a selfish brute. He was desperate, and desperation bred recklessness. Jonathan had seen men like him on Wall Street. Cornered with no escape, they'd set the world on fire, even if it meant burning themselves too. That evening, Jonathan sat by the fireplace, the flames casting his shadow long across the worn wooden floor. On the table was his laptop, dusty from 5 forgotten years, now humming back to life with new emails. The legal war had officially begun. He was no longer a ghost in the forest. He was once again Jonathan Hayes, the man no one dared cross if they valued their peace. And this time, he wasn't fighting to protect a company. He was fighting to keep safe the home and family he had finally reclaimed from the darkness. Brandon Miller sat in the messy house, once spotless thanks to Hannah's care, now cluttered with empty beer cans, dirty dishes, and the stench of cigarettes and liquor. It had been 3 weeks since he threw Hannah and Leo out during a snowstorm, and he had assumed they were dead. At first, he felt satisfied, a twisted, cruel kind of satisfaction, imagining Hannah begging in desperation, then freezing to death with the child he despised. But then reality struck. There was no one left to yell at, no one to pay the bills, no one to manage the mountain of debt piling up. Hannah, who had once skillfully handled their finances despite living with an abusive man, was gone. And Leo, the child he had used as leverage to control her, was gone too. Worse still, Brandon owed money to Tony Carvalho, a notorious loan shark, infamous for his brutal debt collection methods. He needed Hannah back, not out of love, but out of convenience. He hired a private investigator, Tom Bradley, just to confirm whether Hannah was still alive. 2 weeks later, the call came. "Mr. Miller, your wife and son are alive. I've found them." Brandon froze. He's living with a man in a secluded cabin about 300 kilometers from the city. It seems he rescued them in the forest. "Who is this man?" Brandon asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Still investigating. Appears to be a recluse, but wealthy. Suspiciously wealthy." Brandon began plotting immediately. He ordered the investigator to return to the cabin and tell Hannah he was willing to forgive her and wanted to reunite. A blatant lie. "Tell her I regret everything, that I miss Leo, that I'm ready to start over." Bradley hesitated. "I have to be honest. They don't look like victims. Hannah seems healthy, alert, and happy." "I don't care how she looks," Brandon growled. "Legally, she's still my wife, and that boy's been my son for 3 years. Go get my family back." But what Brandon didn't say was this: he didn't want a family. He wanted control. He wanted Hannah back to cook, to clean, to manage his finances. He wanted Leo as a pawn to manipulate her, and most of all, he wanted to erase the humiliation of being left behind and knowing that Hannah was doing just fine without him. 2 days later, Bradley returned to the cabin. This time, it was Jonathan who opened the door. Standing beside him was Hannah, holding Leo tightly in her arms. "Good afternoon. I'm from the law office of Spencer and Associates. Mr. Brandon Miller, your legal husband, requests your return." "I'm no longer his wife," Hannah said, her voice trembling but firm. "He didn't want us to live. He abandoned me and my son in a snowstorm to die." The lawyer gave a dry smile. "We understand there were marital issues, but Mr. Miller is ready to forgive. He wants to reconcile." Jonathan stepped in front of Hannah, fully shielding her from view. "This is her home now, and I'm Jonathan Hayes. I suggest you leave this property immediately." "Mr. Hayes," the lawyer raised an eyebrow, "you seem like a decent man, but you're involving yourself in a complicated legal separation, potential child custody, desertion, maybe even the allegation of enticing a married woman." Hannah didn't run away. She was thrown out during a snowstorm with a child. "I saw it happen, and I saved them." The lawyer scoffed. "Mr. Miller has attorneys, resources, and his own version of the story." Hannah's fists clenched at her sides, but she lifted her chin. "Tell Brandon I'm never coming back, and if he tries to fight for custody of Leo, I'll testify in court. Every slap, every time he shoved me into a wall, every scream my son had to hear. I won't stay silent anymore." The lawyer backed off, but before getting into his car, he turned and warned them. "This isn't over. Mr. Miller has rights, and he intends to use them." As the car disappeared into the distance, Hannah collapsed into a chair, trembling. Jonathan wrapped his arms around her. "He won't stop, Jonathan. Brandon doesn't know how to let go." Jonathan looked into her eyes, his voice steady and filled with quiet strength. "I won't let anyone hurt you or Leo again. I promise." In the middle of the small cabin, surrounded by the snowy forest, they held each other. It wasn't an embrace of gratitude, nor of pity. It was the embrace of two people who had once been broken and were now finding each other. Jonathan whispered softly, "I'm going to call Miles, my best friend and legal advisor. I'll reactivate every legal and financial channel I have. We'll fight, not just to protect, but to reclaim your freedom." Hannah gripped his hand tightly. "You didn't just save our lives. You gave me and Leo a real family." Jonathan bowed his head, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "And if Brandon wants a war," his voice dropped, deep and resolute, "then I'll show him what it feels like to mess with someone who can start an earthquake." The next morning, Jonathan made a call to Miles Anderson, his closest friend and legal partner from his days as CEO. "Miles, it's me." On the other end, Miles sounded stunned. "Good God, Jonathan, you're calling after all these months off the grid?" "No, not months, years." "So, you're coming back?" Jonathan glanced out the window, where Hannah was playing with Leo in the snow. A soft smile touched his lips. "I'm coming back to life, but I need you and the strongest legal team you can bring." Miles didn't ask further. "I'll be there tomorrow, and I'm bringing the team." The following day, a sleek black SUV rolled up the snowy trail and came to a stop in front of Jonathan's wooden cabin. A man stepped out in a sharp suit, gray-streaked hair, and razor-sharp eyes. Miles Anderson, 52 years old, one of the most successful corporate attorneys in the country. The moment he saw Jonathan, he said nothing, just pulled him into a firm, brotherly hug. "You look different." "How so?" Jonathan asked. "Different, like a man who's found a reason to live again." Miles was invited inside. Hannah sat on the couch with Leo in her lap. The little boy looked at the stranger curiously but showed no fear. Miles extended a hand. "I'm Miles, Jonathan's oldest friend." "Hannah," she smiled, "and this is Leo." Miles listened closely as they recounted the full story, from how Brandon had thrown Hannah and Leo out into the blizzard to how Jonathan had found and saved them. And the recent threat of Brandon hiring a lawyer to fight for custody. He said nothing until the end. Then he nodded. So, what do we want? Jonathan didn't hesitate. I want to destroy Brandon Miller. Not just legally, I want to dismantle him. Financially, socially. I want him gone from their lives forever. Miles nodded thoughtfully. All right, but we'll do it by the book. This fight is going to be brutal. Hannah, are you ready for that? Hannah tightened her grip on Jonathan's hand, then looked at Miles. No longer with fear in her eyes, but fire. I lived in fear for 3 years. Now, I'm ready to fight for my son. Miles smiled, an approving, battle-hardened smile. That very night, Jonathan made his move. The forest cabin was no longer safe. Within hours, he arranged everything, chartering a private helicopter to fly Hannah and Leo away from the cocoon of loneliness that had once shielded him. Their new sanctuary was a grand stone and timber estate, hidden beyond a second forest and guarded by the most advanced security system money could build. Every guard on duty belonged to a security firm Jonathan personally invested in, loyal beyond question. Bulletproof windows, auto-locking gates, facial recognition cameras, and a discreet escape tunnel. It left Hannah speechless. She stood in the warm living room, cradling a sleeping Leo in her arms. Her eyes swept over stone walls adorned with oil paintings, Persian rugs underfoot, and golden light brushing the lofty timber ceiling. No trace of that cold, lonely cabin remained. Jonathan stepped forward, gently resting a hand on her shoulder. This is your home now, for you and Leo. Here, no one, not even Derek, will ever touch you again. Hannah looked up at Jonathan, her eyes brimming with emotion and a flicker of fear. Aren't you afraid he'll do something reckless? Jonathan leaned down, murmuring in her ear, his voice as steady and unyielding as the stone walls around them. I'm not just ready for him. I'm ready to bring him down. Legally, properly, I promise. The days hiding away in the new estate passed with a strange, almost unbelievable peace. A kind of peace Hannah once thought she would never know in this life. In the mornings, Jonathan woke up early, brewed coffee himself, and prepared breakfast. Leo would climb into his lap, tiny hands clutching a spoon stirring warm milk, a wide grin lighting up his whole face. Hannah, standing by the stove, would secretly watch this scene, feeling a quiet warmth spread through her chest. Sometimes, Leo would run gleefully down the hallway, his laughter echoing, calling Jonathan Santa Daddy, because in his little mind, Jonathan was the closest thing to Santa Claus. Scratchy beard, a deep, gentle voice, and above all, he brought the gift Leo and Hannah had longed for most, safety. In the afternoons, the three of them gathered to bake cookies. Hannah wore a plain white apron, flour dusting her nose and cheeks. Jonathan helped Leo press tiny snowman shapes into the dough, and all three burst into laughter when the oven filled the house with the sweet smell of melting butter. At night, when the storm outside howled, they would hide under blankets, lying side by side watching the stars through the glass roof. Leo would yawn and drift off in Jonathan's arms, while Hannah rested her head silently on his shoulder. In moments like these, Jonathan wanted to say 1,000 times, I love you. But he knew Hannah wasn't ready yet. She was still afraid. The scars Derek had left were deep. Jonathan understood, and he waited. One night, after Leo had fallen deep asleep, Hannah stepped onto the back porch in search of Jonathan. She found him sitting alone on the stone steps, moonlight catching silver strands in his hair. Strands earned during all those silent, lonely years. Hannah sat beside him, still hugging her thin, knitted shawl. She murmured, You've never asked if I regret dragging you into this mess. Jonathan turned to her, a gentle curve at the corner of his mouth. I don't need to ask. I never saw you as a mess. Hannah laughed, soft as wind chimes brushing each other. In that moment, the cold night wind no longer made her shiver. She met his eyes squarely. I don't know how to start loving again, Jonathan. I'm afraid what I feel now is just gratitude. Jonathan chuckled, deep and warm, then took her hand, his fingers rough from wood and metal, yet they closed around hers so gently. You owe me nothing, Hannah. You don't have to love me to repay anything. If something is growing in your heart, let it grow freely. I'm patient enough to wait." Hannah flushed. She withdrew her hand, only to lay it flat on his chest, where his heartbeat thudded steady and strong under the thick sweater. "This place," she whispered, "this place saved me and Leo. And now, it makes me want to believe I deserve to be loved again." Jonathan didn't answer. Instead, he bent down and brushed her forehead with a kiss, unhurried, asking for nothing, warm as the fireplace flames within. In the days that followed, their closeness grew, quietly but steadily. Jonathan taught Leo to toss a wooden ball in the garden, while Hannah brewed tea and read books beside him each night. Every brush of hands, every glance, stitched another patch of trust onto hearts once torn apart. Some nights, Hannah would wake to find Jonathan dozing off beside her bed, still wearing his coat, breathing deep and steady, his big hand laid protectively over Leo's tiny fingers. She would touch his hair gently, whispering just loud enough for the night breeze to carry, "Thank you for never abandoning us." In the darkness, Hannah knew love was sprouting, threading through old cracks and rooting itself firmly in this new sanctuary, no matter how fierce the storms beyond its walls. As Hannah slowly reclaimed her faith and peace beside Jonathan, far away in a dingy corner of the city, Derek Rivers was a beast backed into a corner. Debts piled higher every day, loan sharks pounding on his door each night. The shady lawyer he'd hired promised to handle Hannah's escape, but in truth just squeezed money out of him, delivering nothing but a few blurry photos. In a filthy bar, Derek sat surrounded by empty beer bottles, the stench of stale alcohol wrapping around his already rotting sanity. He smashed his phone screen with his fist, roaring when the chief detective called to report that Hannah was now being protected by some mysterious rich man. "He thinks money can steal my wife? I'll take it all back, I swear." In Derek's mind, reason dissolved into pure hate. He no longer thought about courts or law. He wanted to shatter Hannah's safe haven, drag her and Leo back, no matter the blood it cost. He pulled an old duffel bag from under his bed, rummaged out a rusty handgun and a few leftover bullets from his days working as an armored guard. Derek's bloodshot eyes mirrored the desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. Across the city, Jonathan sat in his private study inside the estate, the warm desk lamp throwing shadows on a face focused and cold as stone. Miles Anderson appeared on the video call, reporting, "Derek has sold nearly everything he had left. He's bankrupt. Our sources say he's secretly trying to buy a weapon." Jonathan nodded slightly, his voice steady as bedrock. "I anticipated this. Double security. Set up alarms around the forest perimeter and all estate entry points. Any unfamiliar face shows up, neutralize it immediately, legally and safely." Miles met his eyes through the screen. "Are you ready, Joe? If he goes all in, this won't stay a legal fight." Jonathan clenched his fist so tight his knuckles whitened. "If he dares lay a finger on Hannah or Leo, I'll protect this family, no matter the cost." He ended the call, rose, and looked through the glass window. Out in the cold night, he saw Hannah teaching Leo to wave to the guards patrolling the courtyard. The golden porch light crowned her hair like a warm fire. Jonathan whispered to himself, a vow solid as iron. "Come on then, Derek. If you dare, you'll learn, touch those I love, and you touch hell itself." That night, a vicious winter wind howled through the pine forest, the trees shrieking like an omen. Inside the estate, Hannah lulled Leo to sleep, oblivious to the darkness prowling outside, ready to swallow the fragile warmth they'd begun to call home. At the forest gate, Derek Rivers, reeking of whiskey, staggered forward, clutching a rusty handgun like a cornered beast. He slipped past sensors, unaware the security team was already poised. A guard caught movement, flashed a light on the shadow weaving through the trees. Derek fired wildly, bullets ripping through the night. Alarm sirens wailed, floodlights swept the woods. In the bedroom, Hannah jolted awake at the shots. She clutched a whimpering Leo close, heart hammering. The door burst open. Jonathan stormed in, gripping the handgun he'd kept locked away for 5 long years. "Hannah, don't be afraid. I'm here." Hannah trembled, eyes brimming. "It's Derek. He really came." Jonathan met her gaze, voice iron solid. "He won't touch you, I promise." He ordered Hannah to lock the door and hide with Leo under the reinforced bed. Then he charged into the hallway, where red emergency lights pulsed and radios crackled frantic orders. The security team tightened their perimeter, but Derek fought like a rabid wolf, firing and laughing maniacally. He screamed Hannah's name, voice raw and broken. "Come out! You owe me! That boy owes me!" Jonathan stepped onto the front terrace just as Derek stumbled up the stone steps. Floodlights caught Derek's face, sweat-soaked, eyes bloodshot. Jonathan raised both hands, calm but commanding. "Derek, drop the gun. There's no way out." Derek cackled, raising the barrel straight at Jonathan. "You think you've won? I'm taking everything back, Hannah. My boy. I'll kill you first." A shot cracked. The bullet grazed Jonathan's shoulder. Without flinching, he lunged at Derek like a lion on prey. They crashed onto the frozen steps, fists pounding. The gun clattered away, Derek flailing uselessly as Jonathan snarled, "You will never hurt Hannah and Leo again." The security team swarmed in, pinning Derek down as he shrieked like a demon unleashed. Blood trickled from his split lip, but hate still seethed in his glare. Jonathan stood panting, shoulder throbbing with pain, but his eyes were calmer than ever. He turned and pushed open the bedroom door. Hannah rushed out, Leo clutching her neck tight. Jonathan drew them both into his arms, whispering, "It's over. He'll never come back." In that instant, with the wind raging outside, Hannah knew every nightmare had finally ended. And this time, she didn't just have a sturdy house. She had the strongest shield a heart could ever trust for the rest of her life. After the night Derek was captured, the estate seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, along with its owners. The wind still whispered through the pines, but the urgent footsteps and tense radio chatter faded, replaced by a child's laughter and the cozy aroma of warm tea drifting through the kitchen. Jonathan kept his shoulder wound bandaged, but refused to stay at the hospital long. He had more important things to do, being here for Hannah and Leo. Every morning he still rose early to brew coffee, holding Leo's tiny hand as they ran circles in the garden like an ordinary, devoted father. At night, Hannah sometimes woke from old nightmares, tears spilling as she touched the bandage on his shoulder. But Jonathan always soothed her, murmuring, "It's nothing. I've never felt more alive than now." When Derek stood trial, Hannah gripped Jonathan's hand tight. Her testimony, along with the evidence Jonathan and Miles gathered, sealed a long prison sentence Derek could never wriggle free from. He turned away, eyes burning with spite, but this time Hannah felt no fear. Beside her stood the man who had turned her fear into dawn. That spring, Jonathan took Hannah and Leo back to the city, not to hide, but to begin anew. He officially resumed his role as chairman of Hayes Capital Group, but in his office now hung photos of Hannah and Leo instead of certificates and stock charts. Every weekend he left calls and meetings behind, packed a picnic bag, and drove his wife and son to the countryside, where the pine forests and warm sunlight, once haunting memories, had become their own secret paradise. One quiet afternoon, with Leo dozing in his mother's arms, Jonathan kissed Hannah's forehead and whispered, "I once lost everything, but because of you and Leo, I learned how to love again. And this time, I'll never let go." Hannah smiled, tears glimmering under the soft sunset. Amid 1,000 new beginnings, she knew this was home, a place where she was loved, trusted, untouched by any darkness ever again. 1 year after that fateful stormy night, Jonathan and Hannah stood on their own private beach, white sand stretching endlessly, gentle waves lapping at the shore, sea breeze playing with Hannah's hair as her face glowed with quiet joy. In a tiny suit and mismatched shoes, Leo scampered around their feet, clutching a velvet pillow tied with the glittering wedding bands. Guests chuckled as he ran circles, proudly declaring in his squeaky voice, "Daddy, Mommy, don't forget the rings. I'm your best man today." Hannah wore a simple white gown, her rounded belly peeking through soft lace. With every step she took, Jonathan's hand rested gently at her waist, steadying his wife, and the two tiny lives stirring inside her. Soft music drifted through the salt, sweet air. Only a handful of closest friends were there. Miles, who had stood by Jonathan through loss and resurrection, now smiling proudly as their witness. The ocean breeze carried Leo's giggles along the tide, painting a picture of a family too full of light for any shadow to touch. As Jonathan slipped the ring onto Hannah's finger, he gazed deep into her eyes and murmured, "A year ago, I thought I had saved you and Leo." He paused, voice thick with emotion. His eyes found Leo squealing with delight, then drifted to Hannah's gentle bump under white lace. A soft smile broke through as he finished his truth. "But you and the kids saved me first." On that beach, where the sunset painted the horizon in shades of fire and gold, Jonathan Hayes closed his eyes and knew in his soul he had found the rarest treasure, a family reborn from loss, fear, and unbreakable love.